He was known by 3 names. The official records have the first one, Marcos Maria Ribeira, and his official data, born 1929, died 1970. Worked in the steel foundry, perfect safety record, never arrested, a wife, 6 children, a model citizen because he never did anything bad enough to go on the public record. The second name he had was Marcão, Big Marcos, because he was a giant of a man, reached his adult size early in his life. How old was he when he reached 2 meters? 11? Definitely by the time he was 12. His size and strength made him valuable in the foundry, where the lots of steel are so small that much of the work is controlled directly by hand, and strength matters. People's lives depended on Marcão's strength. His third name was Cão, dog. That was the name you used for him when you heard that his wife, Novinha, had another black eye, walked with a limp, had stitches in her lip. He was an animal to do that to her. Not that any of you liked Novinha, not that cold woman who never gave any of you good morning, but she was smaller than he was, and she was the mother of his children, and when he beat her he deserved the name of Cão. Tell me, is this the man you knew? Spent more hours in the bars than anybody, and yet never made any friends there. Never the camaraderie of alcohol for him. You couldn't even tell how much he had been drinking. He was surly and short-tempered before he had a drink, and surly and short-tempered just before he passed out. Nobody could tell the difference. You never heard of him having a friend, and none of you was ever glad to see him come into a room. That's the man you knew, most of you. Cão. Hardly a man at all. A few others, the men from the foundry in Bairro das Fabricadoras, knew him as a strong arm they could trust. They knew he never said he could do more than he could do, and always did what he said he would do. You could count on him. So, within the walls of the foundry, he had their respect. But when you walked out the door, you treated him like everybody else, ignored him, thought little of him. Some of you also know something else that you never talk about much. You know that you gave him the name Cão long before he earned it. You were 10, 11, 12 years old. Little boys. He grew so tall, it made you ashamed to be near him, and afraid because he made you feel helpless. So you handled him the way human beings always handle things that are bigger than they are. You banded together, like hunters trying to bring down a mastodon, like bullfighters trying to weaken a giant bull to prepare it for the kill. Pokes, taunts, teases, keep him turning around. He can't guess where the next blow is coming from. Prick him with barbs that stay under his skin, weaken him with pain, madden him because, big as he is, you can make him do things. You can make him yell. You can make him run. You can make him cry. See? He's weaker than you after all. There's no blame in this. You were children then, and children are cruel without knowing better. You wouldn't do that now. But now that I've reminded you, you can easily see an answer. You called him a dog, and so he became one for the rest of his life. Hurting helpless people, beating his wife, speaking so cruelly and abusively to his son Miro that he drove the boy out of his house. He was acting out the way you treated him, becoming what you told him that he was. But the easy answer isn't true. Your torments didn't make him violent, they made him sullen. And when you grew out of tormenting him, he grew out of hating you. He wasn't one to bear a grudge. His anger cooled and turned into suspicion. He knew you despised him. He learned to live without you, in peace. So, how did he become the cruel man you knew him to be? Think a moment. Who was it who tasted his cruelty? His wife, his children. Some people beat their wife and children because they lust for power, but are too weak or stupid to win power in the world. A helpless wife and children bound to such a man by need and custom and, bitterly enough, love, are the only victims he is strong enough to rule. There are men like that, but Marcos Ribeira wasn't one of them. Think a moment. Did you ever hear of him striking any of his children? Ever? You who worked with him, did he ever try to force his will on you? Seem resentful when things didn't go his way? Marcos was not a weak and evil man. He was a strong man. He didn't want power. He wanted love, not control, loyalty. Some of you remember an incident. Marcos was maybe 13, and so were you, taunting him on the grassy hillside behind the school. You attacked more viciously than usual. You threatened him with stones, whipped him with kapim blades. You bloodied him a little, but he bore it, tried to evade you, asked you to stop. Then one of you struck him hard in the belly, and it hurt him more than you ever imagined, because even then he was already sick with the disease that finally killed him. He hadn't yet become accustomed to his fragility and pain. It felt like death to him. He was concerned. You were killing him, so he struck at you. It could have been any one of you that fell to the ground. You knew then that he was even stronger than you feared. What terrified you most, though, was that you knew exactly the revenge that you deserved. So you called for help, and when the teachers came, what did they see? One little boy on the ground, crying, bleeding. One large, man-sized child with a few scratches here and there, saying, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." And a half-dozen others saying, "He just hit him. Started killing him for no reason. We tried to stop him, but Count is so big, he's always picking on the little kids." So many witnesses. The teachers had no choice but to believe the accusation, until one girl stepped forward and coldly informed them that she had seen it all. Marcos was acting to protect himself from a completely unwarranted, vicious, painful attack by a pack of boys who were acting far more like cows, like dogs, than Marcos Ribeira ever did. Her story was instantly accepted as the truth. After all, she was the daughter of Os Venerados. Novinha, her cold manner and bright mind, made her just as much an outcast among you as Marcos. None of you could think of a time when she had ever made a friendly gesture toward any of you. And here she was, saving Marcos. Well, you knew the truth. She wasn't saving Marcos. She was preventing you from getting away with something. Marcos didn't see it that way. He had been called an animal so often that he almost believed it. Novinha showed him compassion like a human being. A pretty girl, a brilliant child, the daughter of the Holy Venerados, always aloof as a goddess, she had reached down and blessed him and granted his prayer. He worshipped her. 6 years later, he married her. Isn't that a lovely story? Why did he come to hate her, to beat her, to despise their children? And why did she endure it, this strong-willed, brilliant woman? She could have stopped the marriage at any moment. The church may not allow divorce, but there's always desquite, and she wouldn't be the first person in Milagre to quit her husband. She could have taken her suffering children and left him, but she stayed. The mayor and the bishop both suggested that she leave him. She told them they could go to hell. There was a tie that bound them together in a marriage they hated. That tie was Marcos's disease. It shaped his life from the moment he was conceived. The genes his parents gave him combined in such a way that from the moment puberty began, the cells of his glands began a steady, relentless transformation into fatty tissues. Dr. Navio can tell you how it progresses better than I can. Marcos knew from childhood that he had this condition. His parents knew it before they died in the Descolada. Gusto and Sida knew it from their genetic examinations of all the humans of Lusitania. They were all dead. Only one other person knew it. The one who had inherited the xenobiological files. Novinia. Novinia knew that Marcão was dying. She also knew before she married him that he was absolutely and completely sterile. I saw the genetic scans. Marcos Maria Ribeira never fathered a child. His wife had children, but they were not his, and he knew it, and she knew he knew it. It was part of the bargain that they made when they got married. After her parents died, and before her children were born, Novinia loved only two people. Pipo was her second father. Novinia anchored her life in him. For a few short years she had a taste of what it meant to have a family. Then he died, and Novinia believed that she had killed him. The night Pipo died, Novinia showed him something that she had discovered, something to do with the Descolada and the way it works with the plants and animals of Lusitania. Pipo saw more in her work than she did herself. He rushed to the forest where the piggies waited. Perhaps he told them what he had discovered. Perhaps they only guessed. But Novinia blamed herself for showing him a secret that the piggies would kill to keep. It was too late to undo what she had done, but she could keep it from happening again. So she sealed up all the files that had anything to do with the Descolada and what she had shown to Pipo that night. She knew who would want to see the files. It was Libo, the new Zenador. If Pipo had been her father, Libo had been her brother, and more than a brother. Hard as it was to bear Pipo's death, Libo's would be worse. He asked for the files. He demanded to see them. She told him she would never let him see them. They both knew exactly what that meant. If he ever married her, he could strip away the protection on those files. They loved each other desperately. They needed each other more than ever, but Novinia could never marry him. He would never promise not to read the files, and even if he made such a promise, he couldn't keep it. He would surely see what his father saw. He would die. It was one thing to refuse to marry him. It was another thing to live without him. So she didn't live without him. She made her bargain with Marcão. She would marry him under the law, but her real husband and the father of all her children was Libo. Libo knew that he was hurting his wife Brushinia and their 4 daughters. He hated himself for what he had done. He tried to stay away. For months, sometimes years, he succeeded. Novinia also tried. She refused to see him, even to speak to him. She forbade her children to mention him. Then Libo would think that he was strong enough to see her without falling back into the old way. Novinia would be so lonely with her husband, who could never measure up to Libo. They never pretended there was anything good about what they were doing. They just couldn't live for long without it. Why did Marcos Ribeira consent to this? Novinia thought it was because he wanted a wife and the illusion that he had children. To take away his shame in the community. It was partly that. Most of all, though, he married her because he loved her. He never really hoped that she would love him the way he loved her, because he worshipped her. She was a goddess, and he knew that he was diseased, filthy, an animal to be despised. He knew she could not worship him or even love him. He hoped that she might someday feel some affection, that she might feel some loyalty. Each child that came was another proof to Marcos that he had failed, that the goddess still found him unworthy. Why? He was loyal. He had never hinted to any of his children that they were not his own. He never broke his promise to Novinia. Didn't he deserve something from her? At times, it was more than he could bear. He refused to accept her judgment. She was no goddess. Her children were all bastards. This is what he told himself when he lashed out at her when he shouted at Miro. Novinia knew what she was, an adulteress, a hypocrite. She knew she was hurting Marcaun, Libo, her children, Brushinia. She knew she had killed people. So she endured, even invited Marcaun's punishment. It was her penance. It was never penance enough. No matter how much Marcaun might hate her, she hated herself more. All the people in this story suffered pain. All of them sacrificed for the people they loved. All of them caused terrible pain to the people who loved them. And you, listening to me here today, you also caused pain. But remember this. Marcaun's life was tragic and cruel, but he could have ended his bargain with Novinia at any time. He chose to stay. He must have found some joy in it. And Novinia? She broke the laws of God that bind this community together. She has also borne her punishment. The Church asks for no penance as terrible as the one she imposed on herself. And if you're inclined to think that she might deserve some petty cruelty at your hands, keep this in mind. She suffered everything, did all this for one purpose: to keep the piggies from killing Libo.